Hi, people. So I've just watched the results of the Conservative leadership contest. As expected, Liz Truss was the winner. She will therefore be our 56th Prime Minister, the third woman in the post. I'm just going to read out the results here. Truss got 81,326 votes. Sunak got 60,399 votes. That is respectively 57.4% to 42.6%. So it's a clear victory, but not an overwhelming victory for Truss. Probably closer than some people expected. Um, I'm not sure how Sunak would feel about that. Kind of bittersweet, I guess, that he came that close. Um, I suppose in theory he could run again in the future, but I think sort of understanding in both within Labour and the Tories is when someone has had a big run, that's a chance, and that's it. But who knows? He might. There's a lot to say about this, so I'm just going to start with what I feel is her priorities as Prime Minister. This is Boris Johnson's last full day as Prime Minister, so hopefully they'll upload a video about what I feel is his legacy. But first of all, her priorities. Obviously, the cost of living crisis, that's number one, because it really is impacting a lot of people and it's going to get harder. So, yeah, a lot of people are concerned about that. I think she needs to offer immediate help. Um, I stand by what I said earlier, though. I think the Tories have a perception problem whereby, I mean, her refusal to have corporation tax, I do question. Um, but I'm not an economist. I could be wrong. My gut feeling is, yeah, the Tories have a problem with pandering to the rich and powerful. It's just something I feel is intrinsically linked to that party. Um, so that's the first priority. Law and order. Now these aren't in any particular order of hierarchy, but I think law and order definitely is one. Crime's out of control in this country. I mean, I don't want to imply that it's worse than anywhere else. Awful incident in Canada, incidentally, yesterday in Saskatchewan, 10 people stabbed to death. Um, but really, I do think there's a general feeling out there that crime, particularly in the capital, is in a bad way. I think there's a particularly brazen situation with criminals who are basically just doing what they want. I mean, we've always had crime, always. But recently it does seem to have been particularly brazen. And I mean, when we see 87-year-old pensioner murdered in his wheelchair, when we see a little girl killed in Liverpool in the crossfire of gangs, there's something very, very rotten out there. There's another report in Manchester of a elderly Sikh priest beaten up, and it showed the couple walking away, smirks on their face. I think there's evil out there. Now, I wrote to the Ministry of Justice recently. I'll just make this brief because I did cover it, but um, this is one of the biggest problems: accountability. You know, the MOD said in part of their answer, as I read out, they said there's a long-standing tradition of judicial independence. Okay, I get that. The government cannot dictate what the outcomes of individual cases should be. But here's the problem: our justice system, no one trusts it. There's no confidence in it, and the public have no power over the decisions that judges make. They're just not accountable. You know, the courts of law have a postal address, and like I said, there's a remote chance if you write to the Attorney General. Actually, the current Attorney General, Suella Braverman, has been tipped to be the next Home Secretary. But if you write to the Attorney General, she or he can refer that to the Court of Appeal. But in the vast majority of cases, nothing changes anyway. So what can Jill or Joe Public do about weak judges? Next to nothing. And I think it's a blame game. You know, judges say that their hands are tied, they're simply following guidelines. The government says, oh, we can't interfere in the judicial process. What empowerment does the public have It's infuriating. Meanwhile, you have these brazen criminals doing terrible, evil things. And when I say it's out of control, I'm not suggesting that the UK, for example, is comparable to some parts of the world, but it's a bad situation. And Liz Truss needs to do everything in her power, at least to improve public perceptions. Tough on crime is a big part of it. Sentencing is a very big part of it. But reassurance. I think empowerment. One of the good things Dominic Raab done was introducing his time as Justice Secretary more transparency in verdicts. That's a good thing, but a lot more needs to be done. Tories are meant to be the party of law and order that improve it. Um, I'm talking about this one more than the others because it's really one I feel very strongly about. National security, next issue, national security. Absolutely standing up to Russia and China. We've been standing up to Russia for a while now. China, not so much. One good thing about Liz Truss is, as Foreign Secretary, she has been hawkish. Now, I say that's a good thing. I don't think it's empty posturing. I think it's very important at the moment. I think it's realpolitik. I think it's the right thing to do. And the fact that both she and Rishi Sunak were talking tougher regarding Beijing is a good thing. For too long, this country has pandered to Beijing. This idea that we have to basically be on side for the sake of trade. Short-term trade gains are not worth selling out on their values. They're just not. And I think it's right that we treat China with a great deal of caution. There are a lot of things going on right now. One of them, certainly not restricted to this, but one of them is the treatment of young Australian activist Drew Pavlo. He is still facing years in prison for a tweet, an email, excuse me, almost certainly concocted by the Chinese embassy. That shows the sort of malign influence that they're capable of. His lawyers have called for the Metropolitan Police to look at the IP address of that, because he's a long-standing human rights critic and campaigner, and it's very, very possible that the Chinese embassy has attempted to smear him. He's back in Australia, but he still has these legal question marks over his head. But things like that show China's malign influence. We can't totally cut them off. I understand that. And I don't think we can 100% cut off the trade issue. But one thing that's good about Liz Truss is she has been consistently tough on this subject. As Foreign Secretary, she's been outspoken. So I do trust that she will. This is one area she will be strong, um, and definitely continuing to support Ukraine, standing up to Putinism. Very, very important. Moscow and Beijing are the two big ones, but also Tehran and other hostile regimes. I would like to see human rights brought to the forefront of our foreign policy. It's not the only thing, but it's an important thing. If we don't stand up for our values, then what do we have as a nation? I think it's very, very important. Keeping the United Kingdom together. I mean, the Scottish Nationalists will keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Sturgeon wants another referendum in 2023. I do think Truss's recent comments were not diplomatic, and I think probably they could backfire because Sturgeon and her party will claim it's arrogant and that Truss is disregarding the Scottish people. Of course, it wasn't that. It was a snide at a rival politician, but it was a little bit undiplomatic. And yeah, but keeping this country together, we're at a time when there are question marks. The Northern Ireland Protocol, Scottish nationalists, of course, galvanising again. I don't think there's any appetite in Scotland for another referendum. That's the good news. The bad news is the SNP continue to be divisive. They continue pushing this. They won't respect the results of the 2014 referendum. But as United Kingdom Prime Minister, it is absolutely one of her priorities to do everything in her power to keep this country together, which means keeping the four nations together. Um, and I think that thing, of course, there's many, many other areas, social care, the NHS, transportation. But one other thing that comes to mind is cleaning up politics. One thing I've been disheartened by is the fact that during the campaign, Liz Truss has said next to nothing about this subject. And I think part of that is because she was pitching to the base. And the base, a lot of them still like Boris Johnson because it's a bit of a cult. But the wider public, I do feel a lot of people were angry over Partygate and angry over the state of the Conservative Party. Right now, I think a lot of people feel they're basically quite corrupt. So I think she needs to, if she wants to win in 2024, she has to really show that she'll clean up politics, which means zero tolerance for MPs and ministers and herself, for that matter, in terms of one rule for us and another rule for them. I think one of the biggest problems with the Johnson era is it was absolutely riddled with that. And it wasn't just Partygate, it was the Dominic Cummings affair, it was the Matt Hancock affair, which is one thing after another. Johnson was tone deaf to it. Now, Liz Truss cannot bring herself to criticise Johnson in any way, shape, or form. And what she's done is probably quite practical. She hasn't resigned. She stayed as Foreign Secretary. Ostensibly, today is her last day as Foreign Secretary. I mean, if some big crisis happens today, technically she would have to deal with it in that capacity. Um, but I'm not convinced that she is given the wider public reassurance that she's going to clean up her party. I mean, after all, that's why Johnson resigned in the first place. The Chris Pincher scandal, Partygate, and a range of other things lying to Parliament. There is this perception that the Tories are quite corrupt and arrogant and entitled with power. If she wants to win in 2024, she and her party are really going to have to reach out beyond the base and recognise that those red wall seats, you can't take them for granted. Um, So I think that's a major priority. Now, just before I close this, a few words on the woman herself. I do think she's been quite a good foreign secretary. She secured trade deals with Japan, Australia. She has been robust in standing up to powerful adversaries. So, based on her record as foreign secretary, I think there's a potential there that she will be a strong prime minister. But at the same time, she's come out with some strange comments over the years. Some people find her frankly a bit odd. Her mannerisms are unusual. She's rife for parody. There's a woman, I forget her name, but she does a superb Liz Truss impersonation. Um, I mean, May was mocked for the whole Maybot thing, Johnson as a sort of clown. I'm not sure what the satirists are going to come up with for Liz Truss. It's healthy in a democracy, by the way. I think that's part and parcel of critique, of holding the powerful to account, the freedom to be able to criticize and even ridicule. Um, I think sometimes her communication is not the best. She can seem a bit robotic, a bit. I don't think she's the best communicator. Is it the most important thing? Maybe not. Delivery is more important, but at a time when perception is important, not totally irrelevant. How she communicates, how she wins over the wider public is important. Right now, from what I've been saying, a lot of people felt that the choice between Truss and Sunak was not a good one. They were both insiders. You know, NDTV, the Indian channel, is pitching is very much about, oh, we could have had our first Asian Prime Minister. But what they need to understand is in the UK, it's very much about the fact they were both insiders. They were both closely tied to Boris Johnson. If the Tories had chosen someone like Tom Tugendhat or Kemi Badenoch or to a lesser extent Penny Mordaunt, it would have been a radical move. I think there is a concern this is more of the same, and Truss is going to be continuity Johnson. Yes, Johnson had some achievements, but like I say, and I'll cover this in a video later, I think he will be very closely associated with Sleaze. That's a big problem. So she certainly has a work cut out for her. Tomorrow, um, she'll be going to Scotland, the first time in living memory. It won't be in London, because of the Queen's mobility issues. But she is the new Prime Minister, and I hope she's successful for the sake of the country. But she has to reach out beyond her party. This whole contest was obviously an internal contest. Um, I think if the Tories want to win in 2024, some of her, some of the image problem there, she will really need to address. One of them, in my opinion, is that they're not a party for the rich and powerful. And so far, Truss hasn't really done enough, in my mind, to to change that perception. I mean, the fact that she is reluctant, well, she won't think about corporation tax. I mean, there's a perception issue there. Um, yeah, but I hope she does have a successful premiership because honestly, people can hate the Tories or whatever, but it's in all of our interests that it is successful. Um, sure there's more to say, but I'll leave it there for now. What else trivia? She's 47, so relatively young, on the younger end of things anyway. Um, in my lifetime, actually, in my lifetime, prime ministers have tended to be on the younger side of things, averaging sort of late 40s. So that's not particularly unusual or noteworthy. What else can we say? Third woman prime minister, former Liberal Democrat. She wasn't always a true blue Tory. Born in Oxford, um, but grew up, I believe, in Paisley in Scotland. Um, and other than that, yeah, she's had a number of ministerial portfolios. Quite a successful foreign secretary. Not the best communicator by her own admission, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I just hope she isn't going to be another Boris Johnson in the sense of, some people have this nostalgia for Johnson, but already. But one of his problems was the flippant approach to politics. On some level, I think Truss is probably a more serious figure overall, but sometimes she comes out with questionable comments as well. We need an adult in politics, and I don't know, I mean, the recent comments about Emmanuel Macron, it's on the table to see. I forget the verbatim comment, but it remains to be seen if he's a friend of the UK or not. That's just crass. It's not diplomatic. Um, and playing up the whole tough Brexiteer thing is boring now, quite frankly. I get it. It's an internal Tory thing, but um, I want to see someone who's going to be a stateswoman who really will reach out in the world and not, be inward looking. She has to show that she's a world leader, and like I say, she's been a strong foreign secretary, but I want to see very strong um, improvement and continuation of ties with our closest allies. Yes, the United States, but also absolutely our neighbours in Europe and across the Commonwealth. Very, very important. We don't have to snub China, but definitely we need to take a step back. I'd like to see the Confucius Institutes closed. I'd like to see Beijing called to account when they insult us. Um, I think more could be done. I think the narrative and the direction is going in the right way, actually, but more can be done. Definitely continuing to stand up to Russia. So yeah, she has her hands full, but I hope that she has a successful premiership. She'll be the Queen's 15th British Prime Minister. And anyway, I'm no doubt I'll have more to say tomorrow when it happens. I'll leave it there for now. But that's it. Liz Truss is our next Prime Minister. One last thing, I do think she should bring Sunak and his allies into cabinet. Um, I'm not saying she has to give him a major role, but because that was closer than expected, I think if she were to snub Sunak, his allies, people like Dominic Raab, it would be a mistake. Um, I've heard Kwasi Kwarteng's been tipped as the next chancellor, which would mean Mrs. Sahawi's tenure was one of the shortest ever, just over a month. Um, let's see, like I say, Suella Braverman, maybe Home Secretary. Um, some other figures out there. I'd like to see Tom Tugendhat and Kimmy Badenoch in senior positions. Maybe Penny Mordaunt as well, because I think they're all quite capable people. Tom Tugendhat, I could see as Foreign Secretary, for example. Um, Home Secretary, I don't know about Braverman. I still think there's something of a hidden quality about her. Um, anyway, I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts. But as expected, Liz Truss is the winner of this very long contest. Felt like one of the longest leadership contests ever. I do think for the future, the Tories need to find a slightly smoother way of doing it because to have this kind of rumble over different candidates and a long, prolonged process between two, I just think it's too long. That's not good. That uncertainty is not good. Anyway, it's done now. Liz Truss will be the next Prime Minister.